for United Way of Licking County. And I want to welcome you this evening as United Way continues to lead, convene, and educate our community. Conversations about homelessness and housing in Licking County. We will be recording this session this evening. Licking County is at an economic and cultural inflection point. And so I want to start this evening by sharing some excerpts from an article written by Derek Clay, CEO of Columbus Chamber, recently in a dispatch in December. He said the Columbus region stands at the edge of a transformative moment. Momentum is accelerating. Workforce development is gaining momentum. He goes on to say that what matters most now is how the region leads through this moment. It demands data-driven insight to navigate complexity, advocacy that reflects realities, and a willingness to convene leaders around shared challenges and around opportunities. Bold leadership will be essential and rewarding. Leaders will need to push for smarter workforce strategies, embrace innovation and partnership. Understand that progress is not driven by a single industry or institution, but by the combined effort of many. The region's competitive advantage is when leaders align around shared goals, bring every sector to the table, choose to lead rather than react for the sake of long-term prosperity. Leadership will recognize a simple truth. A strong economy depends on healthy people. The Columbus region cannot be its best business community without prioritizing the well-being of its workforce. Supporting mental health, resilience, and balance is not separate from economic growth. He closes by saying, it is the power of all of us that will define what comes next. So our question for tonight is, how will Licking County, part of the Columbus region, continue to grow? How will we choose to define what comes next? Already good work has been done through the framework process, and plans are underway for a comprehensive county plan. But as we address the health of the people, there's probably no greater challenge for our region and in the Licking County than that of homelessness and housing. I want to start off tonight, say I could sit here and cry all night long about the things I have seen in regards to homelessness and housing, but I want to give you a perspective, a story of the history of what's been worked on in the last 10 years around this issue. Since 2016, United Way has invested $4,489,000, and that does not include the thousands of hours of staff time in addressing homelessness and housing. There's an old saying that you never know until you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Some of you know I learned that truth in a very real way. After United Way led the county through a wide needs assessment, 2016, we identified 3 focus areas to turn our attention and our future investments toward. So I decided to share that news with anyone and everyone who would listen. Combined, I spoke to 2,500 individuals. I decided to do this through an awareness campaign that involved walking 450 miles, spending 2 days in each township for 50 days, while living off what I could carry in my backpack. Why 50 days? I was celebrating my 50th birthday, 5-year remission of breast cancer, and decided to raise $50,000 for our community, which I raised $57,000. Little do I know that sleeping in public parks, ball fields, the edges of trails and tracks, I would encounter a homeless culture, subculture, that Licking County has not yet fully grasped. There were challenges of what bush I should use when there were no restrooms available, what sink I could shower in before doing a presentation, How would I stay warm in 20-degree below temperatures? I learned a lot. And if any of you want a ground's eye perspective on what it's like to be homeless, I challenge you, go out there on the street and sleep tonight. In 2017, with the help of Lutheran Social Services and our leadership consultant, who previously a VP with Lutheran Social Services, we began exploring the development of an additional shelter to address growing needs. We learned that there was a growing disconnect between those working in the field and those who were experiencing homelessness. Unsheltered people could be found in all corners of the county. Bed utilization rates were down. Barriers to shelter were high. Communication and navigating with those on the streets were almost non-existent. The concept and understanding what low barrier shelter meant was quite literally not really a conversation in Licking County. In November of 2018, United Way convened a group of stakeholders and leaders in Licking County, together roughly 20 people, making up a diverse recommended group of leaders, and visited with the Community Shelter Board. Their advice and help was greatly informative and appreciated. We had the opportunity to talk about how a continuum of care and response system works in Franklin County and to tour several services and shelters. It was agreed by the United Way Board of Directors that we would return and begin convening and coordinating similar efforts in Licking County. Further conversations were had with Barbara Poppy, nationally known, as well with other leaders. In January of 2019, the next meeting happened at Licking Memorial Hospital. Those who attended the trip in Columbus were able to share feedback and responses. Eventually, after several additional meetings, a task force was put together, put out an RFP for consultants to help with 3 items: affordable housing, the development of coordinated services, and the development of a low barrier shelter. A task force worked to raise money for this effort, supported by local donors, businesses, along with the city and county dollars. 2 consultants were hired. One consulting group was to work with a homeless action plan around 2 priorities: affordable housing and the coordination of services. Another consultant was to work with a smaller group headed by the Newark Development Partners and work on developing a low barrier shelter. Temporarily, a building was offered to be available to transform it into a shelter. Let's be honest here. This was intense work. Excuse me, I turned page back here. The work carried on through the beginning of 2020 until we all know COVID and a lockdown happened here in Licking County, and flooding followed the next day. This added an additional strain to these efforts and called upon United Way to convene the community in addressing the unfolding COVID pandemic. Within a few days, United Way began to convene almost 70 leaders regularly every Monday morning at 7 a.m. First by conference call, because that was the extent of our technology, and eventually by Zoom. We all learned how to use it. We put out shouts for requests needed immediately. United Way and the Licking County Foundation collaborated to develop a COVID relief fund, immediately providing dollars to the community before any government dollars arrived on the scene. COVID put under a microscope the best of our community, but also put under the microscope the areas that needed work, as we were the only community in the region that had no coordinated plan to provide even the basics of a hygiene station for washing and bathing, or even a public water fountain. That's where you're sitting. It was the grassroots efforts of going to the homelessness on the streets that made the difference and quite literally saved lives. In the summer of 2020, the events following the death of George Floyd further highlighted the importance of our work and paying attention and being intentional to include minority voices at the table who disproportionately were affected by homelessness, also previously recognized through our work by our consultants. The BIPOC and the LGBTQ community voices in our community had been experiencing exclusion, direct and covert discrimination, and not invited to help create strategies that would be sensitive to their particular issues and needs. I pause here because I realize that in today's environment, even saying those words are met with mixed emotions, perhaps even in this room. But in keeping with the United Way values, we are called to be honest, to share the whole narrative, not just select portions, and we are called to speak for those who are marginalized and who do not have a voice. By the end of 2020, we had an action plan to share with the community, provided by the consultants of Analytical Insight. By this time, our consultants were hired to work with a small group of low barrier folks to work on the shelter. At the end of that piece of the work, ended on January 6th, 2021 at 1:30 p.m. when we were informed that the building previously reserved for a shelter was now to be used for a thrift store. A small group of people continued to work on this, but with no success. In 2021, the effects of multiple waves of COVID lingered, and resetting was our priority. 2022, when the announcement of Intel's investment would shake things up in Licking County again. With the initial promise of activation in 2025, Licking County went through a 4-alarm fire. The impending changes that announcement had will be met with mixed emotions and reactionary anxiety. On one hand, there was the excitement about the wonderful opportunities associated with economic growth and change. And on the other hand, there was fear and discomfort about the impending growth and change. In 2023, finally digging out of the COVID crisis a bit, our United Way Board of Directors discussed our plans to continue general funding with the issue-focused approach on homelessness. We followed the action plan's recommendation in several areas. We became the first funder to support a reentry task force focusing on addressing homelessness before reentry occurs. We started funding mobile crisis teams, and we began funding the first intentional outreach navigator position through BHP. In October of 2024, in response to New York City passing an ordinance regarding public camping that directly impacted our unsheltered residents, United Way quickly convened almost 200 people right here in this room, although we had the whole space opened up. We briefly reviewed the work of the Licking County Task Force and highlighted leaders in 5 areas working in specific areas of homelessness and housing. We asked for feedback from a very diverse group of participants, including those experiencing homelessness, housing providers, city and county officials, and regional experts. We asked questions to see if everyone affirmed the directions recommended. We shared that United Way would continue the work of bringing a coordinated system to Licking County. Written feedback was provided from those in attendance. Conversations with many around the county and region regarding funding opportunities were had. We used the help of an intern from Denison University to collate and provide some additional insight into information gathered. In January of 2025, we took a deeper dive and held an additional community partner conversation on homelessness with those experiencing homelessness at the table. The Community Shelter Board provided video equipment for unsheltered people to tell the stories they chose to tell. Additional dollars were secured from a partnership with Microsoft to provide immediate programming and resources to address homelessness. 3 initiatives were taken directly from the action plan and were developed and announced and implemented at our annual meeting. We launched the Volunteer Hub to connect volunteers with opportunities that includes helping in the area of homelessness and housing. Already this year, our Volunteer Hub managed to connect over 2,122 volunteer hours, serving those directly affected by homelessness. We believe that engaged volunteers become engaged donors and also become engaged, important people addressing important issues. We launched a hygiene hub to immediately help offset the financial strains of 41% of households in Licking County that are living paycheck to paycheck at the end of the 2023 ALICE report. Lack of hygiene was attributed to greater truancy rates and decline in school success. We launched an ID program to immediately address barriers to shelter and resources, and we announced a partnership with Microsoft to contract with a person who would begin to carry out the recommendation of the action plan to develop a formal local response system. In spring of 2025, our board president, Ben Royals, and our staff met with the Licking County commissioners letting them know of our intent to contract with someone to help develop and coordinate a response plan, and to explore more ways to leverage more dollars to the community to help with this effort. In spring of 2025, we partnered with a group of concerned citizens to bring awareness and information to the community about the root causes of homelessness and to lift up success models from around the county. The goal was to share a documentary, Beyond the Bridge, and spark conversation, and it did. We continued with 3 other successive meetings that we announced back in the fall of 2026. October 7th, we held a free public screening of that documentary. On November 18th in 2026, we held a conversation around financial stability, a deep conversation about the most recent Alice report. January 20th, we hosted a conversation on housing model solutions, a conversation that was about permanent supportive housing models and associated obstacles and opportunities. So again, I'm not going to cry. I could cry. There are stories that will break your heart about people who are homelessness. But what I want to say is, this is tiring. This is a lot of work. And I'm fired up. Why is it important to share this story? Because it is a community story, detailing the difficult and thoughtful work that has been done to date and underscoring the urgent call for all of us to get moving in the same direction. We have a mantra in Licking County, and some of you know it, and some of you may not know it. And like all mantras, we can take a deeper dive and explore its origin, its past historical context, as well as its truthfulness for today. I sit at the tables of many who religiously repeat this mantra. We're a generous community. We all work together. That's true. But I will tell you, 2 truths can exist at the same time. Because I have sat at the tables. I have sat at the trails. I have sat at the public parks. I've stood on the corners. I've walked the miles. I've put on the shoes to tell you there are people in this community who feel forgotten and feel that we're not working well together. 2 things can be true at the same time. See, we're all a little bit of a St. Anna Center, aren't we? All of us. Families and communities are complex, and that's why United Way values transparency and inclusion. Open meetings and records of conversations are kept. We know that healthy communities address conflict in healthy ways. If we are honest, all of us have acted in ways that are less than honorable. I've seen some of the best responses come from this community. There are such loving and wonderful people in this community. And I've also seen some of the worst. Whisper campaigns, attacks, tones, intimidation, gossip, and bullying, grandstanding should not be the model we aim for in our families, our communities, and our nation. Tactics addressing our fears and anxieties should not be tolerated and are not helpful in achieving collective success. So this brings me to tonight. We've gathered experts who work with our county and our region in addressing growth and the associated issue of homelessness and housing. We will hear what the impending growth will look like, and we'll be learning about some funding models and ways to better coordinate a response system. I encourage you to really listen to what they have to say this evening. With that, I'd like to introduce our panelists tonight. We will go down the row. Each of them has a prepared presentation that they'll share. We'll also have some additional questions and opportunity for us to converse together this evening. With that, I'd like to introduce first Cameron Garczyk from Licking County. I just recently got to meet Cameron. He's a delightful person. And Cameron, I'm so glad you're here and really excited about what you bring to the community. So I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deb. Good to be with you all tonight. So again, my name is Cameron Garczyk. I serve as the Executive Director of Licking County Community Improvement Corporation. We are the county's economic development organization. So some of you may have heard of us, some may have not. But in my role, I am the county's economic development director. So pretty much every county throughout Ohio has a point person for countywide economic development. In this role, I work with our community partners. So whether it's our mayors, whether it's economic development directors in a specific village or city, our planning director, our engineers, I work with them closely in terms of business retention, expansion, and all that goes into economic growth and development. So a bit about our origins. Garczyk County was founded in 2012. It was a partnership between the county commissioners, the Port Authority, and the Licking County Chamber. And they got together and said, hey, let's look at economic development in the county. Let's follow the model of kind of Jobs Ohio, some other counties that were looking at nonprofits to do economic development. So prior to 2012, economic development in Licking County was under the purview of a economic development director who reported directly to the county commissioners. I report to a 15-member board of directors that includes a county commissioner, but it also includes a lot of other elected officials from across the county, as well as private business folks. So what our structure allows us to do is move at the speed of business. I work with businesses every day. I work with real estate developers, brokers, companies that want to come here and do business, whether they're a small business or whether they're a large business. I'm talking to them about what they need to achieve success, what their employees need. This is our board of directors. So we have 15 individuals who serve our organization that I report to. Some great folks, a lot of them you may know. We have mayors, we have a county commissioner, we have Rob Montegnis with Licking Memorial, some developers like Robert O'Neill, Jennifer McDonald with the Licking County Chamber. So they're all very involved in the community and really help me guide the organization to make sure that we're listening to the needs of our businesses and our community members. So as I mentioned, we have three main priorities that we focus on, and that's business attraction, business retention and expansion, and workforce development. So attraction is bringing businesses to Licking County, right? We want jobs, we want a good tax base, we want payroll. So we're always trying to attract a business here. Well, one of the jobs that I do is work with One Columbus, our regional partner, as well as Jobs Ohio, our state partner, on leads that come in from site selection consultants, from companies that may be, international, global companies, and they're looking at maybe 4 or 5 different states, maybe 4 or 5 different locations in each state. And so my role is to look at all the different properties we have in the county, the buildings that are available, and submit those leads. And one thing about Licking County, we're very fortunate, is we have a lot of property, we have a lot of existing buildings, we have a long history of industry in this county. When you look at Central Ohio, obviously Franklin County at the center, a lot of population, long history of industry, but you look at those peripheral counties and mostly it's been agriculture, right? You've had kind of one major city in a lot of these counties and a lot of small villages, and agriculture has been the biggest industry. Well, here in Licking County, manufacturing has been a long part of our origin. We've had industrial parks for decades, which is kind of unheard of in a lot of places. And so we are really primed for future growth, and you guys have seen it, whether it's Intel in New Albany or whether it's the Port Authority sites and the business parks that we have. We're in a good position, but now the conversation is how do we manage that growth? How do we look out for our community partners and make sure that everybody's kind of included and taken into account as we're seeing the future growth. So the last thing here, workforce development. So obviously attraction, retention, expansion, helping our existing businesses grow and thrive. And workforce development, that's where we look at all these ancillary things. And that's where kind of housing falls into the category for us. Childcare is part of that. Transit is part of that. Other infrastructure needs. And so we actually have a committee that's called Licking County Works, where we get together and we talk about all those issues, and more we're talking about housing. So it's a big part of what the conversations in economic development circles today, which wasn't necessarily the case 5 to 10 years ago. Housing was part of the conversation, but it wasn't, up there at the top of the list. So as I mentioned, these are some of those workforce development needs, and, you know, housing concerns is definitely a big one. Career pathways, childcare, transit. So as I mentioned, Lincoln County, best place to start or grow a business, a family or career, that's kind of our mantra. And we want to promote our communities, and we want to make this a place where people want to do business. Here are some successes I just wanted to highlight for 2025, because when it comes to Lincoln County's industrial market, which is where you're seeing a lot of interest, you know, these are 100,000 square foot buildings, spec buildings or whatnot. We're kind of leading the way in Central Ohio right now. I mean, you talk to our partners at One Columbus and say Lincoln County is the hotspot, right? So there's a lot of companies that are looking at our sites and looking at potential investment and expansion. You see a lot of that in New Albany, and New Albany is kind of filling up. The city of New Albany, their business park is kind of full now, so they're going to start looking at other parts of the county, Jersey Township, Monroe Township, Johnstown, and expanding from there. So here are some of the successes. So Boeing is continuing to stay in our area with another $50 million extended lease investment. Prudential Cleanroom Services opened a new facility, $35 million investment. Axiom Packaging is expanding in Jersey Township, $45 million. Kansai Helios in Johnstown, $20 million expansion. And then the Newark Arcade right here in downtown Newark, a true gem of our downtown, opened this year after an extensive renovation. These are just a few highlights of the successes we're seeing. And that's not even including all the small business growth and expansion. And if you kind of look at some of these job numbers, you know, they add up pretty quickly. And so some of these jobs are high-tech, six-figure jobs, some probably not. Some are, you know, those $15 an hour, $20 an hour factory jobs. We have the whole swath. And so when we're talking about housing, right, we need to accommodate all those folks, right? If we want to attract professionals from other states and they're buying $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 houses, we do need to have those as an option. But we need to have the option to have, you know, a starter home for somebody fresh out of high school, fresh out of college, maybe working that factory job. Some of them may be traveling right now from Muskingum County or Perry County. We have a lot of employees in Lincoln County who don't live here. And maybe they would live here, right? It's a great community and we want them to, but maybe it's not affordable or it's not a possibility. So they're driving 45 minutes or an hour for a job that pays maybe 20 bucks an hour. So that's certainly part of the conversation as we look at the companies that are coming here and kind of the opportunities that they offer. Here are just a few of the growing industries we're seeing. So obviously semiconductors with Intel, you guys are familiar with. A lot of data center activity, that's kind of the hot topic of the day. So Lincoln County has roughly 40 data centers that are built and operational or under planning and construction. The vast majority of those are in the city of New Albany in the business park. So they've kind of been insulated from the greater Lincoln County community. We're starting to see more data center and, you know, involvement kind of eastern part of the, I guess, east of New Albany. So Heath and Hebron have Microsoft data centers coming in. There's some activity in Pataskala and Etna as well, and also Johnstown. So just wanted to put that on your radar that will not be going away, that conversation. Life sciences and pharmaceutical, we're certainly trying to attract those types of businesses. Those are high paying jobs, a lot of technical expertise with those. And as we're seeing, you know, federal policy around tariffs, there's a lot of reshoring and onshoring from companies that want to start doing more manufacturing in the state. So we're trying to capitalize on that industry for Lincoln County. And then a few others, there's a lot of interest about renewables, batteries, food manufacturing, automotive manufacturing. So we're trying to harness that manufacturing history in the county as it comes to attracting new businesses. One thing I wanted to highlight is the largest industries in the county. As I mentioned, manufacturing is our top industry, far above the national average. So if you're able to see this, I know it's kind of small, but there's a gray line, and that's the national average in terms of employment per industry. So we're far above the metric for manufacturing, far above the metric for transportation and warehousing. As you guys know, we have a lot of logistics and distribution facilities, particularly in the Pataskala and Etna area. But there's a few where we're lacking. So professional, scientific, technical services, healthcare and social assistance, far below the national average. So those are the kind of industries that we want to attract, for the jobs of tomorrow. And the occupations kind of go in line with the industries. Again, a lot of folks that work in transportation and material moving. We have a lot of office administrative support, production, but we're below the metrics when it comes to healthcare practitioners, healthcare support, personal care and services. So we talked about economic growth, and it's been coming and it's going to continue to come, and that's a good thing. We want to be growing, but we want to manage that growth. And so here are some population numbers. We're at about 186,000 people in Licking County currently. We had about 4.5% growth over 5 years from 2019 to 2024. And our projected growth is very similar over the next 5 years, 3.5%, 4%. That's a good rate of growth. I will tell you that the Department of Development a few years ago did a study for the whole state of Ohio, and they analyzed each county and looked at population increase or decrease. And I would much rather be looking at these numbers than, for instance, Lawrence County in Southern Ohio, which is seeing a 30% projected population decrease in 30 years. 30% of your population gone. That destroys a community, right? I mean, you don't have hospitals, you don't have grocery stores, that type of thing. So it's good we're seeing this, and it's also good we're not seeing as big of a rate of increase as some of our neighbors in Central Ohio. So in that same study, there was showing a 54% increase in population in Delaware County in 30 years. We're at 18%. So the study, we're kind of in the middle, right? You have a 30% decrease in one county, a 54% increase in another, and we're sitting around 18%. And so, again, that's a lot of growth, but it's much more manageable than what some of our peers are seeing. And in terms of jobs, we have been outpacing the national rate for job increase. So that's good. Another statistic that is positive, as we look at what's going on, is our wages in Licking County have actually have seen the largest increase of any of the 11 counties in the Central Ohio region over the last few years. So good statistic, that we always can improve and do better, but that is a positive sign. This chart just shows, and I know Dave will probably talk a little more about population, but just to give you an idea of kind of where we're at, where we may be by 2050. So it took us about 40 years to increase in population by 60,000. We're looking at maybe 30 years to do another 60,000. And that's kind of in the middle range. So obviously, things could happen. The population doesn't increase as fast, or it goes up even more. But we're, I think right now, the 6th fastest growing county, give or take, in the state of Ohio. So when it comes to housing, the Site Selectors Guild, which talks, these are professionals that look at different sites around the nation and all the different states to prime those sites for development and growth. They rank housing as one of the top concerns, the number one concern for business attraction. So the conversation is shifting rapidly to how can we look at housing to attract businesses to our areas. And obviously, a lack of housing supply, which is what we're seeing in Licking County in Central Ohio, it just increases the demand, it increases the costs that we're seeing. So we need more housing. We need housing of all types. We need to look at mixed use. We need to look at single family. We need to look at apartment buildings. Get back to having starter homes, right? An affordable starter home. So that if you're a college graduate and you're making good money, you shouldn't have to, you want a nice house. You don't have to buy a $300,000, $400,000 house because that's your only option. Because I'll tell you, I think there's a lot of people that are in Licking County who are house poor and may be living in a $400,000 or $500,000 house right now. But all it takes is one economic downturn, which could happen, right? We always say, everything's good to go, but you look at what happened during COVID, right? It could be a year from now, it could be 5 years from now. And there's a lot of individuals that could, lose their home and be homeless that you would never think would be facing that, or would have to downsize and go into a type of home that maybe takes away from somebody else who needs housing. So just wanted to put that out there. But obviously not meeting the demand for housing is driving up prices. And we have about, I think, 10 to 15,000 units, a need for 10 to 15,000 units in Licking County right now to meet just the demand that we're seeing. and it's well over 100,000 in Central Ohio. So as Deb mentioned, the county is undergoing a comprehensive plan effort, which I'm a part of. I'm very excited about that. It is very much needed. It's been about 25 years since we've had any type of county-wide planning. The framework initiative that resulted from the Intel announcement was very positive, and that led to some great conversations, but that only included a portion of the county. And so we're seeing a lot of communities, take comprehensive planning and zoning much more seriously now. So as we go into 2026, that'll certainly be part of the conversation around, how do we plan accordingly for our growth, and housing is going to be a part of that. There will be a comprehensive housing study as part of that comprehensive plan that we'll be able to utilize moving forward. There's also been a lot of state movement, regional movement on housing. Department of Development has a grant program now called RED, Residential Economic Development Districts, and that's encouraging different types of housing, mixed-use housing, and it awards funding to communities who are taking this issue seriously. So that's just a brief overview, and I'm happy to talk with you further as the night goes on, but thanks for having me, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dave.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am Dave Dixon. I'm the Data Director to the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. There we go. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the commission, or MORPC as we're known, we are a regional council of 95 local governments in the 15-county Central Ohio region. So that's about 2.5 million people today live in that area. And we have a number of different focus areas that we're involved in. The core, a lot of what we've done in the past, and people may know us for, is around long-range transportation planning, both in the urban areas and in the rural Central Ohio counties surrounding Franklin County. And we also have environmental sustainability functions, housing and community development, and most recently, economic development as well. I'm going to do my best today as I go through the slides to try to bring these facts and figures. So I warned you, I'm the data director. I like charts, I like numbers. There's going to be a lot of them, but hopefully you can get a copy of these slides later. But I'm going to do my best to tie it back to the issue that we're talking about, and that's housing and homelessness and what these high-level trends are. And since I think we have time, I'll just start with a personal note here that I grew up in Pike County, Ohio, where my mother was the director of our only homeless shelter and our emergency food bank in the county. And I spent years and years and years debating with my mom while she's focused on the ground, how do I help the client that's in front of me today, this person who's at their very end, and they need help, and I'm here to help them. And I'm studying political science and public administration. I'm going upstream and talking about like the systemic problems and reforms and all that. So mom passed away last year, but I'm going to pretend that you're all her, because she wouldn't listen to anything I said unless I was directly speaking to something she cared about. So let's keep it relevant. Okay, so here's a slide on population growth for the region. I'll reshare Lincoln County here in a second, but the important thing here is that we're growing. And we have been growing steadily for a long time. What that tells me is, if we could address this growth and take advantage of this growth in the past, we can still do that. So I encourage folks, don't be scared by the news stories that you hear that say unprecedented growth, exponential growth, that kind of thing, because that sounds scary. We heard a little bit about that earlier. How do we react when we hear something scary? What I say is, well, if we were adding school buildings then, and we're adding public services then, we can keep doing that now. This is not a scary one. Look at the blue and green line there. The other thing to highlight here, I'll go ahead and switch to Lincoln County, is that if we're doing our jobs right, every household has a home. That's something that we didn't used to have to say, I think, in Central Ohio, and I'll give you some history on that in a couple slides, but every household has a home. That should be fairly basic. Another way to put this is, with all of our economic success and jobs coming in, my friend John Melkai would say, a home is where a job goes to sleep at night. So if you're coming at this from community building and or economic development or whatever your lens is, we all have an incentive to do the same thing. That is provide adequate housing for everyone who lives here. It's a good economic argument. It's a good moral argument. It's the right thing to do. Okay. I get this question a lot because I'm the data guy. Where are all these people coming from? When I grew up here 30 years ago, we didn't have nearly as many people, all that. So let me unpack this for you. Again, we're going back up to the regional level. So what this shows is since the last census, the most recent data we have shows that most of the growth is actually coming from international migration. And those are mostly working age adults working skilled jobs and disproportionately starting new businesses. Those are facts. So those new neighbors who are coming are significantly driving the economy. A huge portion of this, however, is coming from Franklin County, which is really a hot spot in terms of international migration. You can scan the code to see any county in our region. I pulled out Licking counties here. The story of Licking County is actually a little different, which is why we have this available. So there is a significant amount of international migration, but Licking County is doing an excellent job at pulling people from around the United States to move here. So that's that pink bar that you see on the left. The natural change, which is births minus deaths, is actually slightly negative. What that means is if people aren't moving here, you'd be more likely to get in one of the situations that was mentioned earlier where folks might be projecting a decline. I'd have to agree that growth is a good problem to have. Decline can set up all sorts of funding and service spirals that can be hard to get out of. So this is what the picture looks like in your county. Okay, so we're talking about housing, and we talked about how everyone needs a place to live. And more people are coming. So remember the angle of the chart. We said the population growth looks like this, right? These are the number of housing units being built by year. Does that chart have the same shape? No, it doesn't. So the note up there says we've been struggling to keep up on housing for quite some time. And that is true. You can see going back 2004 and a handful of years prior, we were adding much more housing stock than we are today. Now, Michael has some more recent data, maybe some something to look forward to for 2025, and he has also, as I get into some of these housing slides, some Licking County specific items, comparisons to Franklin County, comparisons to Ohio, things that will give you guys a little more context. But you can see the challenge here. For context, you're looking at about 11,000 last year. For roughly this footprint, a lot of regional stakeholders are calling for 16, 18, even 20,000 units per year. So we're not there yet. Okay. We hear folks say it's so hard to find a place, right? It's so hard to find a place, whether you're renting or buying, or they feel like the only option they can find. We heard the term house poor, as we say, housing cost burdened, right? Is really something that they don't consider to be affordable to them. This is not imagined. So what you see here, if we just look at the blue line from 2013, 18, 23, what that is the vacancy rate for home owners. Okay, so where we were was considered to be pretty healthy overall. Okay, so about 2% homeowner vacancy rate, that's expected. There's not as much turnover in home ownership. And builders don't go out of the way to build significantly more supply than is needed. For renter vacancy rate, around 7% is considered healthy. You go down, fast forward to 2023, 2024, and you can see how low those have gone. 0.7. How do you find an apartment? And if you can find one, is it a community of choice, or is it just the one you could find? If you find one, is it one that was in the budget you were hoping for, or is it just the one you can find and maybe you're paying a lot more than you wanted? But again, homelessness is not a choice. So if you have to choose between, I can pay that, but maybe I'm going to have to skip out on some other things, people will choose it every time. You will not sleep outside tonight if you have enough money in your checking account to pay that rent. And we'll see how that's showing up in people's real lives here in a moment. Okay. We heard about how incomes are rising. That is true. They are throughout the region and in most counties in the region. But if you're looking to buy a house, so this is for my economic developers in the room, we're looking to move to a place where you're gonna need to buy a house. Note that home sale prices are accelerating much faster than incomes. So that light blue line on the right shows us that over a 5-year period, incomes went up about 30%. That's really good, right? That's really good. But you can see that more than 55% increase in home sale price. So what does that mean? It means that even though we're making more money, if you're in the market for a house, you're gonna have less buying power than you did before, or it's gonna take a larger percentage of your income, would be a better way to say that. Renters are not immune. So last year, we had the 7th highest, can I count 7th? Yeah, we had 7th highest rent increase out of the 140 markets in the United States that the matrix tracks. 7th out of 140. That's not a list you want to be at the top of, right? That's not a list you want to be at the top of. If you look at the other cities on there, some of them make intuitive sense. We read about their struggles in the newspaper. So this isn't something you want to be on. So the reason for this slide is whether you're buying or renting, you are confronting this in the market right now. Okay, in Licking County, this chart shows the ratio of home sale price to median household income. And we can see back in 2012, you were below the magic number that's considered 2.6, the magic ratio. So if you have a household, 2 people earning $50,000 a year, their household income's 100, they can buy a $260,000 house and be okay for their other expenses. You've gone past that up to almost 4. So when I looked at other counties, all 15, I went here in my little report that I have here, you were about, I think, the 11th most affordable out of the 15 right now, the way it sits right now. So in terms of where people are gonna live, that's all right for a while on the economic side, but at some point, as a region, we really do need to come together to solve this problem. We know from our research at Morpsey that about 80% of people are unwilling to drive more than 35 minutes to work. So wherever site you're looking at, you draw a ring around that about 35 minutes away. That's about how far most people are willing to go until they start considering other options. So you don't want to price yourself out of that. All right, we do some public opinion polling, so we have some data that I know no one else has in their slides. You can't get it from ACS, you can't get it from Department of Development, mine. We asked folks, and this is not really a fun slide, but we asked folks, can you find housing that you can afford and meets your family's needs? We got over 2,000 responses from the 15 county area to this question, and only 38, this can be clear, only 38% said they could. Okay, so only 38%. Now this is self-defined affordable. Whatever that person thinks affordable is, they can answer this question however they want. We didn't define it for them. We didn't give them a home price to income ratio or anything like that. We said, can you find housing that you can afford and meets your needs? And only 38% said yes, they can. So just because you quote unquote can't afford it doesn't mean you're not paying that rent or mortgage anyway. So then what happens? What you see here requires a little bit of unpacking. These are the responses to the following question. What necessities, if any, did you have to sacrifice to pay your rent or mortgage in the last year? Now on this first column here, it says less than 35,000. That's our households. Those are our most vulnerable households. Those are households earning less than $35,000 per year. And we got 35 to 100 and 100,000 or more. So what this shows you is, first of all, 55% of survey respondents said they had to sacrifice at least one necessity. And there are other items in here, but these are true necessities: food, clothing, utilities, automotive, transportation, medical care, servicing debt, credit cards, student loans, things like that. So 55%, over half of households, so they're sacrificing something to pay their rent or mortgage. And on the lower end, we got 62%, so they're sacrificing food, 48% clothing, 36% utilities, a tie for automotive and transportation, 36%, more than a third. And looking over to the right, what grabs people's attention is, I bet people all the time, if I came in this room 20 years ago and I said, 10% of households making $100,000 or more are sacrificing food to pay their rent or mortgage, then most people would either, one, not believe me back then, or two, question if this household needs some like home economics class or something. Well, what are they spending their money on? You're telling me they're making 100K and they're cutting back? Come on, right? But I just showed you what some of those other costs look like now. And depending on someone's situation, how many children in the household, are they caring for an elder? What are their transportation costs and other things going into it? That is real, right? That is real. We asked and they told us, and that's scary to me. Okay, but I'm not going to end on doom and gloom because we've been paying attention to this. Stakeholders have been paying attention to this for a few years now. MORPC has a number of programs, services, engagements, hard at work on the housing challenges. Our community development team works on what's called a regional housing strategy and provides community-based planning assistance. And those are tools to help communities address these challenges in ways that make sense for your community. We have a residential services program, hard at work in Franklin County, helping to stabilize residents in their homes with home weatherization services and home repair services, as well as partnering with other agencies and entities around Central Ohio to help get folks that type of help when they need it outside of Franklin County as well. And we are doing what we can to engage with our economic development folks for the work that they're putting in on addressing the housing problem and supporting the regional housing coalition work that's getting started as well. And communities have taken this up. So what you see here is just a smattering of the communities that have either done a study, an updated comprehensive plan or rezoning, or other types of housing reforms since 2020. We couldn't fit them all on the map. We have an Excel spreadsheet we could share too that we're still adding to with hundreds of lines of actions that are being taken. And so I'm hopeful that working together, we can reverse some of those trends that we just saw on the chart to help prevent more people from facing the kind of choices that they shouldn't have to as a family. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Good evening. So as I was listening to Dave's story about his mom, I was reflecting about my family's own journey. I did not grow up in Columbus. I grew up in Youngstown. None of my grandparents were born in the United States. They all ended up moving to Northeast Ohio as they were attracted by the economic opportunity that Northeast Ohio once provided. But by the time I became a young adult, that economic opportunity was no longer alive and well in Youngstown, Ohio. I was so moved by the fact that Columbus was the only place in the state of Ohio that had economic opportunity when I was young. I was determined that my life was going to be in Columbus, Ohio, and I was going to work every day to make it better. And I was so convinced of this, I took an ad out in my high school newspaper, encouraging everybody when they finished high school to move to Columbus, Ohio. I still have that ad, and I was so determined that I organized a spring break trip for people to come to Columbus. Forget Daytona Beach, forget Myrtle Beach, it was Columbus or bust. I got 8 people to sign up for that trip. I was very proud of that number of 8. So I'm going to work on 2 things. I love data as well, and so I was totally geeking out on Dave's presentation, as I hope you were as well. What I hope to do is provide some data that shows some specific Licking County data, and then we're going to transition into homelessness. My name is Michael Wilkos. I'm Vice President of Community Engagement at United Way of Central Ohio in Columbus, but I'm currently the chair of the Continuum of Care for Franklin County. After me will be Erica, who is a greater expert than I, and we'll talk about the statewide issue and specifically that issue in Licking County. So with that, let's start with Licking County. Home values in Licking County are high. They're actually higher than Franklin County. And in fact, not only are they higher than Franklin County, but the average price of a home in Licking County is now 39% higher than the average price of a home in the rest of the state. In addition, we look at rents. Licking County is actually performing better than Franklin County and the rest of the state with regard to the percentage of income renters are currently paying to secure rental housing. The challenge is there's just not a lot of renters in this community. If you look at the 5-year census estimate of what the median gross rent is, these numbers are probably going to look small or low for what the current asking rents are because it's a 5-year estimate. But what you can see is the rental demand in Franklin County is so high that rents in Franklin County are considerably more expensive as people are getting closer to those jobs. As Dave said, there's about a 35-minute appetite. Ever since we have lived in civilization, that has been true. Whether or not you commuted on foot, on horseback, on streetcar, or in the automobile, that has been the break point of how much time you're willing to spend one way to get from your home to a place of employment. What has shifted last year is this data just came out about a week ago, and housing construction within the city limits of Columbus surged last year. It actually increased by nearly 50% within the city limits of Columbus. Just over 9,100 housing permits were issued in Columbus. Much of that is because of what's been happening within the city limits of Columbus. One has been the city has upzoned all of its commercial corridors to go from 6,000 units of allowable housing on arterial streets to 88,000 units of housing. Columbus is also now allowing SRO or single room occupancy housing. Columbus has also permitted and constructed its first tiny home community on the far east side of the city. The city also expanded dramatically its community reinvestment area designation and expanded tax abatement all across the city to basically tell developers, build housing anywhere you can, as much as you can. And then the voters of Columbus have now 3 times approved municipal bonds to incubate affordable housing. Last fall, the voters of the city approved a $500 million housing bond. The city of Columbus hopes to take that $500 million and turn it into $2.5 billion of housing construction within the city limits. The challenge is the rest of the region is not trending in the same way as the city of Columbus, where despite the strong economy, we saw building permits for housing actually drop in the rest of the region. A lot of that drop, by the way, is happening in Franklin County suburbs. And what's happening is those Franklin County suburbs are starting to put out the unwelcome mat. Developers are jumping out of Franklin County and heading into those more rural communities where they find an easier appetite to build. If you look at it another way, the city of Columbus is 42% of the metropolitan region, but last year, 58% of all the houses that were built in the metropolitan region went up just within the city limits of Columbus. The other story around foreign born, I wanted to return to that because Licking County has a lower percentage of immigrants than the state average, considerably lower than Franklin County. But as Dave said, 20% of all of the growth in Licking County last year was due to immigrants. And to put that in perspective, in just 48 months, Franklin County added in immigrants more than the entire city of Newark in just 48 months in immigrants. That is a significant change. Between 2010 and 2020, half of Columbus's population growth was due to babies. Just 26% was due to international arrivals, and 24% was due to domestic. Last year, for 2024, international arrivals we're 77% of the entire region's population growth. That is the highest since 1890. So now let's talk about what is a continuum of care. A continuum of care is a group of stakeholders, collaborators, and partners that are all working on the same goal to make homelessness rare and brief. It is a designation created by HUD, and it is a geographic area. I am currently the chair of the COC board, but I work at United Way of Central Ohio. Our largest single investment is in the Community Shelter Board. And while our singular goal at United Way is to ensure that children are on an academic path to success by third grade, we know in Franklin County, if children are not stable in their housing, they will not be stable in the classroom. So the federal government, HUD, defines a recipient, and in our case, that's the Community Shelter Board, which is just one of 14 unified funding agencies. And then the Community Shelter Board, you'll hear from Shannon Isom at the end, is responsible for collecting all of that data, reporting that data back to the federal government, and we are the #1 system in the country for that data collection and data accuracy. And I thank you for that, Shannon. So what is a crisis response system? I won't read the slide. You can see here, it includes all of these things that are required in order to have an effective system. From prevention to rapid rehousing to permanent supportive housing. These are all of the things that our system works on to ensure that that homelessness experience is rare and brief. An optimized crisis response system is aligned to local housing market realities and opportunities. Those have been shifting so quickly, we are constantly having to look at the data so we can be effective in that. We want high rates of people leaving programs for permanent housing. We want short lengths of stay in programs. We want to divert people facing homelessness to safe and stable housing. And we want to use data to achieve continuous equitable improvement and quickly engage and provide equitable, suitable intervention for each household. So what does it mean to coordinate a crisis response system? You can read here on the slide. It's about monitoring performance and evaluate outcomes, establish and operate a coordinated entry system, establish written standards for providing COC assistance, and more. It becomes complicated very quickly. So who serves on our continuum of care? This is the board for Franklin County COC. It includes all of the major funders in a city. Rather than having nonprofit organizations go to United Way individually and the Columbus Foundation and the city and the county, we have all chosen to coordinate financial resources into one space so we are able to distribute those funds in a coordinated and effective way. That's the board, but who serves on the full continuum are lots of people. Again, I will not read the slide, but it's nonprofit leaders, advocates, youth homeless service organizations, businesses, public housing authorities, hospitals, universities, local businesses, affordable housing developers and advocates, youth advocates, and law enforcement. Combined, our continuum of care has 44 members served by that 11-member funding board. All of that work is done by the Community Shelter Board, our UFA. I used a car analogy recently about the effectiveness of our system. Imagine we're all going on a car trip, long distance across the country. What do we want to do before we get in that car? We want to make sure we've had a tune-up. We're going to check the oil pressure. We're going to make sure that there's a full tank of gas. What we expect of the Community Shelter Board is to get the greatest efficiency out of our system as possible. And they have been doing that effectively for years. When you think about what's happening across the country, Los Angeles has one of the greatest challenges with people experiencing homelessness. More than 70,000 people sleep outside every single night in Los Angeles County, as they have the lowest ratio of housing units to people in the United States. They're not alone. Honolulu, the state legislature in Hawaii made settlements like this legal settlements, as they are so frustrated on what to do with the housing crisis in Hawaii, they decided to make camps legal. In Portland, Downtown parking lots have been converted into homeless camps as more than 1,000 camps have been identified across the city of Portland. And in Denver, here's a tent city that's popped up in their downtown. And also they have a situation with people setting up tents on their state house lawn. And in Columbus, we have homelessness, unsheltered, but it's for the most part been out of sight and out of mind until recently. You know, when you come into Columbus, you see it. You get off at the Polaris Parkway and you see people panhandling. They're at Gemini Parkway before you get to IKEA. If you ever get off to go to the old Columbus Crew Stadium, you'll see either tents or people panhandling on every single corner. That was not true just a few years ago. This is what a good housing continuum looks like. And at United Way, we are interested in everything from affordable housing all the way down to people who may be on a park bench. There is not enough housing in any single one of these categories, including market rate, as the speakers before me already identified. Focus Strategies came to Columbus about 1.5 years ago and did an assessment and said, based on current trends and the housing market, we were projected to see a 68% increase in people experiencing homelessness in just 3 years. And the author of the book, Homelessness is a Housing Issue, Greg Colburn, has done research and he said, there is no correlation with your community's rate of homelessness and addiction. There's no correlation with mental health or domestic violence or those that are criminally justice involved. There's only 2 reasons that will tell you whether or not homelessness will be a challenge in your community. The first is whether or not your housing is available. And when housing vacancy rates hit 5% and stay there, you got a problem. And the other is when rents are appreciating faster than inflation, you have a problem. In 2019, the Columbus region hit both of those marks. That's why when you drive around Columbus, you see a different city has emerged in just the last 5 years. There is the soft white underbelly of progress, and Columbus is following the same trajectory of the Los Angeleses and Portlands and Denvers. We have a problem, we are not in a crisis, and we still have a window to solve it. This is what the data show for the last 3 years for our community. We saw progress in 2024 with the number of people living unsheltered on the land. That's about the efficacy of the system. But with each year, we are seeing the rates of homelessness in Franklin County far eclipse the growth in population. This is not a statement you would hear people have said just a few years ago. What typically I hear in Columbus is, who's going to live in all these apartment buildings I see under construction? It feels like there's a 5 or 6 story building going up on every other corner in the urban core. The reality is we are not building enough. What does that mean? As recently as 2010, we had 107 housing units for every 100 households. That's a pretty good housing market, giving us availability by price and tenure. To put that in perspective, the Cleveland Metro has 115 housing units for every 100 households, and the median price of a home in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County, is running $100,000 cheaper than it is in Franklin. Here's where we got by 2020. We were down to just 102 housing units for every 100 households. And what I think happened during that window is we used to talk about affordable housing and we would other it. We don't really understand it, who it's for, how the income guidelines work, but it was something for somebody else. By 2020, reverse the order of affordable housing to housing affordability. We're all talking about it now. We are on track to be here by the end of the decade. Housing vacancy, appreciation of rents, and scarcity is going to drive homelessness across the region. It's personal for me because it's already happening in my neighborhood. This is 5 doors down from my house. I've already normalized it in my own life. People come to my house, They charge their phones on my porch. Sometimes they use my grill when I'm not home. But I have a relationship with people experiencing homelessness in my neighborhood. I didn't do what Deb did, spend 50 days walking around and living on the land, and I admire you for that, by the way. I don't want to normalize this, because what happens when 4 people become 14, and what happens when 14 people in my neighborhood park become 44? With that, let me turn it over to Erica, who's going to take you through the state balance.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. And I can tell you now, before I even get started, that I'm going to cut out, skip like half my slides. So we'll get you moving here quickly. I'm Erica Mulryan. I'm the Continuum of Care Director at the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. The organization I work for, Ohio, is a coalition of organizations and individuals committed to ending homelessness and to promoting decent, safe, fair, affordable housing for all, with a focus on assisting low-income and special needs populations. Ohio was created in '94 when the Ohio Coalition for the Homeless merged with the Ohio Housing Coalition. To advance our mission, Ohio operates several program areas, which you can sort of see illustrated here on the slide. Some key areas of our work include our training and technical assistance program, our advocacy program, which I'll highlight a little bit more depth here in a second. And then additionally, our work specific to homelessness and our work more specifically related to supporting what's called the Ohio Balance of State Continuum of Care. And I will try to spend the bulk of my time talking about that work. So these are the slides I'm going to skip because I think we've had really nice in-depth set of slides here, presentations here about the challenge around housing affordability, availability. And these are slides that really just speak to data on the affordability side, specifically in Ohio. This is mostly from the Out of Reach report, I believe. The gist of it, right, is that most people don't make enough, particularly if they're earning some kind of a typical hourly wage. They don't make enough to earn to afford a 2-bedroom unit that's renting at your typical fair market rent or your local fair market rent. Rent's going up, evictions going up. And because of the very close correlation between homelessness and housing affordability and availability, we've also, particularly over the past few years, seen homelessness going up as well. You can see on the sort of your left side there, across the country, since the pandemic, homelessness has risen about 33%. And in the state of Ohio, we've seen it increase about 10% overall, with the greatest increases occurring among those who are unsheltered. This would be folks who are living in an encampment, abandoned buildings in their car, etc. And although I didn't bring detailed data about the Licking County experience, I can tell you that for the Ohio Balance of State Continuum of Care, which I haven't even defined that yet, so I'll get to that in a second, we've seen homelessness increase in similar ways to what we've seen across the state of Ohio, particularly among those who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And in general, when I looked at the Licking County data based on 1 day point in time count over the past several years, you generally see a similar trajectory. It's a little bit more nuanced, it's a little bit more up and down, but in general, kind of moving in that same direction, again, which aligns with everything else we're hearing about what's going on in the housing market. I'm just going to highlight that Ohio's advocacy work focused on housing. A lot of our advocacy work is part of the Home Matters to Ohio Coalition, which is where Ohio works along with other housing advocates to advance our particular policy platform. And so some of our key policy priorities include things like increasing tax credits available through Ohio's low-income housing tax credit program, safeguarding the future of the Ohio Housing Trust Fund, addressing problems related to institutional real estate investors, increasing consolidation of Ohio's housing market, and providing legal assistance to qualified renters facing eviction. So now I'm going to spend most of my time talking about the work that Ohio does around homelessness, in particular our work in what's called the Ohio Balance of State Continuum of Care. And I'm going to go to this slide first, and I might come back. So To Michael's points earlier, every community across the country who wants to try to take advantage of key federal resources to address homelessness has to be sort of federally recognized as what's called a continuum of care. Columbus Franklin County is its own continuum of care, just like the other very large communities in the state of Ohio. So each of those blue counties represents a distinct urban continuum of care. And then all the other 80 rural and suburban counties are been lumped together and fall into what's called the Ohio Balance of State Continuum of Care. By being a part of the Balance of State Continuum of Care, rather than kind of being excluded and left there on its own, it ensures that every community in the state of Ohio at least has the opportunity to potentially take advantage of these key federal resources. So within the sort of homeless services sector, in addition to any like local public resources, local private resources that might be brought to the table and brought to the sort of plan to address and reduce local homelessness, there are some really key federal and state resources that anyone concerned about this really needs to be aware of. The first, and I believe Michael referenced this program, is the Continuum of Care program. This is the primary federal response to homelessness operated by through the passage of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, and has subsequently been reauthorized and amended most recently, not quite 10 years ago. The Continuum of Care program provides grant funds to communities and to homeless service providers, particularly to support permanent housing program types. It's a $4 billion a year program, and the state of Ohio, inclusive of all of the COCs in Ohio, is receiving about $180 million a year annually through the Continuum of Care program. The Ohio Balance of State Continuum of Care is getting about $30 million a year through the Continuum of Care program. There's about $3.5 million of the Balance of State COC's Continuum of Care program grant resources that are specifically going to organizations here in the Licking County area supporting people experiencing homelessness here. Beyond the Continuum of Care program, there's also the Federal Emergency Solutions Grant Program, which is significantly smaller. That provides the state of Ohio with about $6 million a year in funding, primarily to support emergency shelter operations and street outreach and other things on a much more limited basis. Some of that money is coming here to Licking County, but I'm sure it's a tiny amount, to be frank. And then lastly, the state of Ohio, we have a state housing trust fund. And this provides funding specifically to support what the state calls its Homeless Crisis Response Program and its Supportive Housing Program. These are also grant programs that provide funding specifically to organizations who are addressing homelessness in their communities. Annually, and at its peak, there's about $65 million a year that was distributed through the Housing Trust Fund. So the revenue for the trust fund comes through recordation fees that are filed when people go to their county reporter's office to, for example, transfer the title of their home if it gets sold. So these are great resources. These are important resources. The resources that are available across the state, the country, and available here in Licking County as well, and being actively used by some pretty strong providers. That we are in an exceptionally challenging environment right now when it comes to addressing homelessness, not only from a sort of criminalization standpoint, but from an attack on funding sources and a dwindling of funding sources perspective. Particularly as it pertains to the Continuum of Care program, we meaning those of us who help provide staff support to Continuum of Care across the country, we are all facing an exceptionally challenging times as the Trump administration has shifted their policy priorities when it comes to addressing affordable housing and in particular addressing homelessness. You saw that sort of the hints of what their policy priorities would look like on the ground. You saw hints of that when they released their executive order on homelessness in July of 2025. What we expect that to look like is that we expect to see federal funding for permanent housing projects funded through the Continuum of Care program specifically to be drastically cut in the coming year. For the Balance of State Continuum of Care, what we expect that to look like starting next year is that we will go from a system wherein we were putting $20+ million a year into permanent housing projects. That means providing rental assistance with supportive services to people to help them exit homelessness. We expect that to drop from $20 million a year in permanent housing to maybe $8 million if we're lucky. We're going to see that across the board as soon as next year. And then on the state front, although there aren't a tax on the housing trust fund yet, they kind of come and go, we're okay at the moment. What we are seeing is we're seeing significant dwindling in revenue. Again, revenue for the trust fund is based on county recordation fees that are collected and then funneled to the trust fund. As fewer people sell houses, as fewer people buy houses, as there are fewer houses available to buy and sell. For example, those fees have drastically gone down, which means that the housing trust fund is not fully funded. And what that means on the ground is that we're seeing grants to homeless service providers from the housing trust fund either terminated or cut in half or even, further reduced. So they're critical resources, important resources, and they are in, if they're around next year, we'll be lucky. So I'm gonna end, sorry, that's an incredibly grim note to end this work, not part of my presentation on, but that is the landscape we are in right now as it pertains to homeless services and the funding. So I'm gonna pass it off now, and I think I did that in the chat.
Okay, how's everyone doing? Oh, it's a lot. I know all of this and it's a lot. Okay. Go back. I'm Shannon Isom. I've been in front of you all a couple of times. So I thank you for having me back. And for those that are brand new to my voice, thank you for allowing me to speak to you about something I am super passionate about. That I've walked with Deb around the 3 years I've been within this community. Thank you. We're going to talk a little bit about building a coordinated regional housing response system and why. It is for a lot of reasons that's already been talked about. Whether it is Fairfield, Butler County, Delaware County, and Licking. These are counties specifically that have identified as rural and have had market forces of growth that have had to make them pause. It is a good thing you're pausing. It is a good thing that you are trying to decide what next to do with your community. Many communities across Ohio are doing the same. Many of them have called HUD. How do we do this? And you know what HUD says? HUD says that, have you talked to your United Funding Agency? You have a couple of them in the state. As Michael said, we only have 15 across the country. But where we're a little lucky is that the first ever that had been studied and then called UFA is up the street, and that's Franklin County. And we call it the Community Shelter Board. So not only do you have up the street the first, not only do you have up the street the one that the federal government came to study this model and called it the UFA. At one point, we were not only the first, but we were the only. We're no longer the only, but we're the best. We're the best in the country. Why? Well, we've had a long time in doing it, so we know how to do it well. So let's talk about Community Shelter Board. The Community Shelter Board serves as the coordinated response system for Franklin County. We are county-based. And because we're county-based and we know that we are surrounded by contiguous counties where we know, because of the work we do and our data that we keep, there's about 15% of our population that is porous between all the counties. There's many reasons why people move back and forth. We know that we consider ourselves the system leader. We convene. We're the voice. We know the system, the homeless system, better than anyone else because we have to. We have to because the region is depending on it. Our 16 partners who we fund depend on it. Our external stakeholders, both city and county depend on it, and our corporations depend on knowing what's coming. And we're thinking about it every day, all day, every moment of every single solitary day of the year. And why? Because we have to align impact. We have to be efficient. We have to know where people are. And we do that as a UFA. I've already talked about that leadership we have there. So we prioritize a strategy. Just like what Deb is doing. I came into this community, I came from Dayton. Ohio. We're covered both Dayton and Preble County. And when I came into this community in Franklin County, what we didn't have is our strategy. And I think that's normal. Market forces change so quickly that you look up and 10 years has passed and you look at your community and you say, oh my gosh, we're not the same. So we put a strategy together. It's 5 years, and we did that with our federal HUD partnership, state, and then our local agencies. And we have data and compliance along with that strategy to hold us accountable. About 10 years ago, when Community Shelter Board was still moving along, and we were about 30 years in, we were at about $50 million in homelessness. Today, we're at 82 million, and we will be increasing this year. Why? Because if you're coordinated and scaled and all moving in the same direction, not a dollar gets wasted, and you know where every dollar is and where every dollar is going. It's important. The reason why I can tell you that number is because we're coordinated. Now, we haven't solved for homelessness yet, but we're all sitting at the same table, talking about the same thing with diverse and interdisciplinary voices. So there's collaboration. And because of that, it is hard for people to not give resources to a system that's working together. We talked about this already. This is where the others are. Ohio is lucky because we have two. I think Pennsylvania also, they only have one. I think we're the only state. No, it looks like New York has the most. But we are a state that has two, so it's ours as well as Cincinnati. So what does that readiness look like? This is who we fund. This is who we write grants unaccounted for, and we sit as the proxy for the county. This continues to grow depending on how we want to coordinate our care. So as a county, as you're thinking about what to do, how to do it, how do we coordinate our readiness? There are buckets that are already aligned, or you can also make your own depending on how you want to curate it and design it for your community. We know that homelessness is a housing issue. You've heard it. I am not going to move through all of the factors that we heard, but I will tell you this. If you for one moment think that people are homeless because they're mentally ill, I would love for you to go back in your memory as I go back in mine and know that mentally ill people were in families that had housing 20, 30 years ago. If we think it's because there's alcohol or drug addiction, I'm in my 50s, I had all of that in my family, and they had housing. None of my family was homeless, and I had 100% of those things in my family. If we think it is because that people are poor and they can pull themselves up on the bootstraps, I had poor people in my family. None of them were homeless. None. They were poor. They were alcoholics, mental ill, pregnancy early, divorce, but housing was not our issue. So this is less about that and more about supply, because human beings are where housing lives. So we know that we have to do more housing. I show this, I saw a couple of people taking pictures, and I put this up here because it's helped me when I came to the community. I couldn't figure out what I was really solving for. And I knew we kept bringing up money for programs, and what I kept seeing were the numbers that were strident to say that we still have homelessness. It was hard to say, what is the return on that investment? So we looked around at other communities and we made our own for ourselves. Now, Lincoln County may not have this emergency shelter. It may move from the bench to some other part, but it is imperative. It is imperative for kids that are just getting done with school or don't go to school. It is imperative that for a healthy continuum, that there is a stair step of housing. I like to also show this because if there's any veterans in the room, you were in support of housing. This is a good thing. If there's any college students in the room, you were in support of housing. It is a good thing. Every single part except that bench is a good thing. Our system makes sure that we are ready for every single solitary part of that system. One thing that I do want to know that has changed, and it is important for us to realize has changed, because we're very clear, mentally ill, alcoholic, poor, we're very clear about those things. One of the things I want you to know for certain, if you walk out of this door, is that the number one developer of community housing that was stabilized in this entire nation. Do you all know the number one developer of community housing? Do you know who they are? It was our federal government. We called them projects. You all know that name. They were the number one developer, and they stabilized for Medicare and Medicaid, aid for children, care for elderly, veterans, and disabled. And they were in the developing housing business. When they got out, no one jumped in that. So we feel that across this country. You'll see that here. If you don't have anyone developing that type of housing, then as you grow, as with Franklin County grows, everybody grows. Not just people with jobs, but children come out of there. And people who are poor will grow. People who are in need will grow. People who are aged and disabled and frail will also grow. And if those two parts of housing go away, deeply affordable, you know, I'm older, but I'm on a fixed income. If that goes away, then it's harder for those two steps that have X's over them for people who are at the bottom to jump over them. Some people will jump over them, and we will think that everyone can jump over them. What's going to be hard to jump over those steps are the elderly, who it's hard to walk and jump at all. So they'll get stuck down here. The very, very young, the orphaned, the mom with children who maybe has lost her spouse. They all get stuck, but you will see some people that will be able to jump from supportive housing to the market. And those are healthy people. We're proud of those folks, but we want to make sure that all the others can also move in a healthy continuum. As you see below, what aligns is how much money you make is also the housing that serves. AMI is the average median income, so you'll see that. I hope for any healthy community that we have 100% of all of those people in our community, and that there's enough housing for all of them. I'm not going to go too far because Michael talked already about the continuum of care. It is important that you all know that a continuum of care cannot happen without partners, some partnership. There's a standard continuum of care, which we talked about, but we are a UFA, so we are a specific type of continuum of care. Why is that important, as you all consider? It is important that you know this special title of a continuum of care, because ultimately it helps you coordinate together. And I will tell you, and Michael will tell you, that we sit together and we argue and disagree too, don't we? Yes, we do. However, we are coordinated because we're all there for the same thing. One of the other things that's really important, this is a busy slide, so if you can take a picture, and we'll make sure that you have it. One of the great things, though, that I came from a community with a standard continuum of care into a community with this UFA. One of the most important things I can tell you is it makes you the most competitive. On Friday, we sat with the deputy secretary, not the secretary of HUD, who's the number one person, but the deputy secretary of HUD. And we spoke Licking County's name. Ohio's an important state to our federal government, to our partners at the federal government. How rural communities are growing and changing is really, really important to the federal government, to leadership there. It was important that they knew who you were. We spoke your name and talked about some of the changes that you're dealing with. One of the things they asked us is how we were helping you. I love that, right? How we are helping you. So I want you all to know, as a very important partner within our contiguous counties, that we are here. We're here to answer any questions. But more importantly than anything, that a continuum of care gives you agency, gives you choices. It lets you decide how your community responds to your community. I think that's important as you transition through the choices and the options that you all are talking about today. Not gonna go through all of this, but this is how the system works. Our number one job is not to shelter. Our number one job, as HUD says, is housing. We develop, we ensure, we ready people. We gotta know where they are, so we put them in shelter because we need to hurry up and put them in housing. It's coordinated. Lets you know what our system includes: housing, programming, shelters, stabilization, street outreach. Here's what we measure: outcomes, quality, and I make sure we're efficient at it. Thank you.
That is a whole lot of information. I can't say enough to thank all of you for your presentations and for being here. I am mindful of the time. I think we have a lot of talkers for sure up here. We're going to pivot a little bit, and I'm going to ask real briefly. You get like 1-2 minutes at the most to answer a question. I'll give each of you one real quickly. I have turned the page, find my questions. Second here. Michael, you moved to my notes. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start with Cameron. Real quickly. What are the biggest housing challenges facing our communities and the increasing economic and population?
Yeah, so certainly our communities need to be having conversations every day about the zoning, land use, and engagement with residents about housing. We need to have our communities look at their zoning code, be open to different types of housing, get away from some of the stereotypes about workforce housing, affordable housing, and really talk about what those mean and talk about the impact of individuals who live in those areas. And so that includes talking with your current residents about opportunities. Because there's a lot of, there's a mentality out there of like, oh, I moved into a community, I closed the door behind me. I don't want any other growth. I don't want that type of housing. And the current communities need to talk with their residents about that.
Thank you, thank you. Moving down the line here, Dave. If all of the stakeholders came together and added an additional 200,000 units of housing and it was provided here in Licking County, would this adequately address the homelessness and housing issues in Licking County?
The answer that I'd have to say would be maybe, it depends, right? So we certainly need more housing units. I stood up there and said we need a home for every household, right? So if all those folks are gonna move here, we need to build that housing, but we need to pay careful attention, cutting through all the talk and all the aspirations to what types of housing we are actually providing as we go forward. So we see encouraging numbers, more units going up. We need to look at that. With the lovely charts that folks have in the continuum of housing, right? Who is this housing for? If we're primarily putting large, single-family homes, detached, away from workplaces, away from transit, for $650,000, that's a good home for someone. But that's not affordable to a lot of people. So yes, we need that type of volume. We've been underbuilding for decades, but we also need housing at all price points for all people.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Michael. What is your hope for the region in order to address housing and homelessness?
If we continue to build in the next 30 years, the way we have in the past 30, we will lose 700 square miles of farmland in central Ohio to low density development. We have to build differently. And I'll quote a researcher out of University of Louisville, when he said, economic self-sufficiency in the urban periphery is no longer a sufficient defense for isolationism. Lines on a map will become blurred. And as we continue to grow, we have to look at housing and homelessness as a regional ecosystem and not as an individual problem.
And Erica, you did a great job providing a lot of information about the balance the state had. In your best wishes or dreams, what would you like to see happen as the federal government continues to address homelessness and housing and funding?
Well, right now, my immediate hope is that we will have a different administration with different policy priorities in place in 2 years, to be frank, and to be honest. But I think what we need to do is we need to look at the, particularly in the homelessness space, look at the examples where we've seen the most success. And I think the VA supported housing program is a great example of where you see best practices come together and align, and when implemented at the scale that they need to be implemented at, right, then you see veteran homelessness drop something like 75%, 50%, depending on the time frame you look at. It's an amazing, it's been an amazing initiative, an amazing intervention. And that right there, I want to highlight is like, particularly in this environment, there's lots of messaging around how we have failed. Our homelessness systems have failed, our programs have failed, and I want to counter that with we've not had anywhere close to enough resources to begin to really address these problems. So the failures, the ongoing homelessness that's not because our programs have failed. It's not because our systems have failed. It's not because the funding sources have failed. It's because we've not scaled them, because we've chosen not to invest in them.
Right? Thank you. So Shannon, what else, from your perspective, do we need to consider together as we determine how to strengthen housing stability for Licking County residents?
Yeah, I think that Licking County has been talking about this for a very long time. And I think it is important for you all to consider, is it timely that you are forward responsive to what we want the community to be? And with that, I think you have the right partners. You certainly have the right people in the room. This room is filled every time. And next is just, how do you want to design it? And to do it in a way in which everyone can be seen and heard. I believe big tables with big tents can make that happen.
Thank you, thank you. You want to hold that for a second? So really quickly, I'm gonna have the staff pass out one sheet of paper. I had more questions, and we may be sending some out by survey, but I want to give everybody here tonight an opportunity to talk to folks at your table, might be people you don't know, and answer one question. And like our previous conversations, we'll collect this, we'll tally this information, and we'll continue to use this. I'm gonna give you about 5 to 7 minutes. It's gonna be down and dirty. Write your names on the top of that piece of paper, find somebody to transcribe some answers, and then when you're done, just leave those on the table. Yeah.
Yeah. This girl wanted to throw out there. This thing like I heard say between working, I was living on the stand, one of them are even. Yeah.
So the question you're answering is on that sheet. Read the question.
Yeah. They highlighted.
Where they at?
I don't know where you're at. There's a lot of Democrats.
Sure, that's probably where it's at.
Yeah. South. I grew up in Chicago, there's a culture, it's our culture.
All I heard was really good.
Right, yes. The southern part.
We are
Actually, your answer has to be doing more as what we've done as things such as what I can see, I go. And I only share that in reference that initially. They told me not knowing anything about how individuals have needs and lots of different even health issues, function problems. What you can read about it here, but until you start sitting down and start dealing with people on a one-on-one basis, and that will help expedite any contact. You know, the last speaker, Sharp made a comment about having all these issues around family and not having housing. Part of the issue I see, again, is I just like them a little different perspective. Is that, and I our society, we don't have. The first thing was successful. That's just. I got dangerous that. And so there's one aspect as far as. I feel connected to the other people, especially on my side. There's a new show last summer called Joanna. And it was about how culturally since the 50s, is a society that's been destined for control. Veteran organizations. All these, there's so many things. There's this literary show. We lost track of our name. How do we make more of them? Especially younger people, they're still in their careers or whatever. That was connection. And then we're coming back to some, and great one, which is and actually just these neighbors help. Especially.
Regardless, I read it. I was Shannon.
Not a lot of discussion. Nothing I'm here. You're talking for 10 years. What's that?
Right down my lines. I was just, hold on. Great. What's the plan? So, you're gonna not agree with it. Put together a framework, some down, plan, and we can tweak it to
Nothing I'm excited about. We go to the grand. My time, we have many years. That's that. Getting involved. And the bridges out the office. Don't get involved on both sides. It's really encouraging. It's not a city those of our community. I don't know. We're now knowing we got much more. I'm really happy. And we've got city council. So that is a nice addition.
Okay, folks, I want to wrap this up because I have a few more things to share.
Great job.
If we could wrap, unless you're going to stay here for a few more minutes, we're going to wrap it up. So leave your answers, your questionnaires on your table. I want to thank you for attending tonight's community conversation. And I want to thank all of those, you guys, please. I hate to cut you off, but I want to be mindful of time.
That's our initial location.
Having so much fun. You're welcome to stay if you want a little bit later after we get through here. But I want to thank all of those in the community that have been doing hard work around this issue and some who are doing it regionally and regularly across county lines. Some good examples of this and organizations are the Licking County Metropolitan Housing Authority, who's doing some work already with Franklin County, the Leeds Action Center, Beacon 360, and the Licking County Coalition of Housing. We want to thank them for all of their work. We also want to acknowledge the recent work done by the Licking County Foundation recently with their announcement following recommendations outlined in the 2020 strategy report, their leadership in helping to create an awareness campaign, and the funding of navigators and the establishment of a fund to address affordable housing in our community is to be highly commended. The United Way of Licking County The United Way and the Licking County Foundation have a strong partnership, and we look forward to partnering with them as the United Way continues to move forward with implementing a strategy and developing a formal coordinated response system to address homelessness and housing in Licking County. I want to thank also all of the organizations in our community, many of them who work with very unpaid staff, and some of the organizations who work voluntarily as a labor of love, like our magistrate working with our home care that's happening with home court. So thank you. Many good people are doing great things in this community. I also want to thank our board of directors at United Way who have stayed with us, who have continued to have discussions about how we can focus on this issue. I want to thank our staff at United Way who've worked tirelessly in this area and helping make this evening possible. And again, a round of applause if we could for our panelists tonight. So what's next for us for United Way? In partnership, as I mentioned, this began in 2023, but in partnership with Microsoft, United Way will be contracting with the Community Shelter Board of Central Ohio. And we'll be following recommendations laid out to help us look at and evaluate a formal structure and the framework to create a coordinated system response in Licking County. A part of this effort will be to develop a formal board of directors who will help oversee and govern the work, not only for today, but for tomorrow. In our early consultants report, a coordinated system is a fundamental to any community's efforts to address and mitigate homelessness, and HUD outlines several important qualities of effective work. Over the past few years, our community discussions and feedback have reaffirmed that this direction is necessary to address not only the issues for today, but as I said, help prepare Licking County for tomorrow with its unique challenges and heading our way with projected growth and change in culture. We have followed the recommendations of our previous consultants that have reaffirmed this since our discussions began. We have secured the funding to work with one of the best homeless and housing leaders in the nation, and we'll work together with everyone in Licking County to maintain current funding streams necessary for today, as well as look at how we will secure new funding streams that are going untapped. We will leverage the Community Shelter Board's expertise, nationally recognized status, and how lucky we are to call them neighbors. Going forward, United Way will assist in inviting people together regularly as we move forward and helping to better coordinate services, collect data, leverage local as well as regional resources. In keeping with United Way core values, we will provide transparency and provide a full narrative. We will be intentional to ask who is not at the table within the work ahead. So in closing, I'd like to share just a really personal story here. It's a story from someone who thinks of me as a saint and a sinner. And I'd like to say we're all in that boat. And we all are in need of forgiveness. And we're all in need of healing and reconciliation. But it's a lesson I learned. It was a story about 20 years ago. I was serving a large church in a suburb in Cincinnati. We worshiped about 450 people. We had a full-time preschool, and we were running a vacation Bible school, about 350 kids running around. I had 3 kids in 13 months. They were as close as triplets could be. My twins were 12 weeks early, and my son came along before their original due date. We had VBS, we had a nursery from 0 to 3. And we had a 3s and a 4s class. And I debated about my son, who was the youngest, where to put him. He was just shy of his 3rd birthday. In the nursery, there were really cool toys, and we liked the nursery. He was comfortable in the nursery. He was excited about the nursery. But in the 3s and 4s class, there was opportunities to meet new people. There were organized crafts. There were things going on. And I said to John, John, you've got 2 options. We can leave you in the nursery. You're familiar with the toys here, or we'll try you in the 3s class. And so we decided we'll go to the 3s class. Well, shortly time went on. I went back to that 3s class, and the teacher said, well, John's not really participating much. And I'm like, John, what's going on? Didn't answer. I picked him up, I held him in my arms. I said, John, we've had a discussion. We have two options right now. We can go back to the nursery, or we can stay here and do what the teacher wants us to do in the threes class. And something happened. John looked at me, almost 3 years old. He grabbed both of my cheeks with his hands. And he said, actually, Mama, I think there are more than two options. He's headed to go do a master's in economic development in Indiana in a few months. I said, what do you mean actually there are more than two options? And his hands on my cheek, and he said, well, I could just stay with you where I belong. I had not considered that. I was so busy going down the road, and I had only had the capacity to see this or that. To address these complex issues, we have got to get beyond this or that, and we've got to start thinking this and that. And the other thing that I learned is that when I paused and I leaned into curiousness, what could this boy mean? That there's more than three options or two options. What could he really mean? He had thought it out. He had credible solutions, alternatives. Wasn't the ones that I necessarily wanted at the moment, because it meant me carrying him around on my hip for the rest of the day, Vacation Bible School. But what he taught me was that it didn't matter how good the toys were over there. It wasn't about the toys. It wasn't about the activities. It's not going to be about the housing, the multiple prices of housings, the systems. I think at the end of the day, everybody in our community, yes, they want a home, but more importantly, they want to belong. They want to belong. So I'm going to leave you with that. I want to thank you for coming tonight, and we look forward to more discussions in the near future.
Yeah.